Welcome to our Stand Together for Communities and Wildlife, sponsored by the Seneca Community Action Group and the Wildlife Energy and Community Coalition. Seneca Energy has proposed a 500 megawatt solar facility across nearly 3,000 acres of prime agricultural land spanning the counties of Cambridgeshire and Suffolk in the UK. The project, if approved, will be the largest such solar-powered plant in the United Kingdom and one of the largest sites in Europe. In addition to more than 1 million solar panels, an expansive road system and transmission line that connects to the Burwell substation 7 kilometers away, the project will host 3 massive battery energy storage systems. The impacts and risks of a project of this scale on the natural environment, wildlife, and the residents living in the 5 villages where the project will be sited are not well known. To give you a sense of scale, this video shows a 500 megawatt solar facility now under construction in the Commonwealth of Virginia in the United States. The area of the Virginia project shown in this video represents only a small fraction of the 4,000 acres consumed by the facility. The surrounding area is comprised of rural residential properties. Lawsuits are now pending over flooding from stormwater runoff and severe construction traffic. There has also been a significant displacement of wildlife, which now moves in backyards and along roads, placing the animals and people at risk. Seneca's suggestion that the wildlife will remain in the project area and return after project decommissioning is without any basis. The Seneca project is designated as a nationally significant infrastructure project under the United Kingdom federal government, which means the decision to approve the application will be made in London and not by those who will live with the construction and project operation for years to come. Those presenting today have attended the Seneca webinars on the project. The online events are part of the public consultation period, which ends December 18th. Despite our attendance, we and others have continually been frustrated by the lack of concrete details provided by Seneca. The purpose of our Stand Together event is to raise awareness about the project, to inform others about the impacts we are likely to see, and to highlight the serious questions that Seneca is either unwilling or unable to answer. Thank you for attending. We hope you will find this Stand Together event informative and entertaining. We welcome your feedback through our live chat or private message. Those of you watching who have dealt with large-scale solar, please reach out and tell us about your experience. And now to our host.
Hello and welcome to our virtual Stand Together. Thank you so much to Lisa from the Wildlife Energy and Community Coalition for that excellent opening video. And it's really, really hard to try and picture what a 500 megawatt solar facility actually looks like until you can see one being constructed. And that's exactly what we've just seen. It is phenomenal. It is huge and yeah, just incredible to try to imagine. So we're standing here we're standing together today to try and stop these hugely destructive, supersized solar power plants from being built on greenfield land. And we're also standing together today to show our pride in our local community and our desire to protect our local wildlife. Solar shouldn't be an excuse to trash the countryside, using the words of an MP, Lord Eric Pickles. And we need to preserve the countryside and the wildlife for our future generations. So I'm Catherine Judkins. I've lived in Cambridgeshire for 22 years, and I've lived in Isleham, a rural village here in Cambridgeshire, for 10 years now. And I've been working with the Seneca Community Action Group for a few months. And I really love living here. It's a great place to bring up your kids, and it's just wonderful. And I really feel very passionately about standing together to support this community. So tonight we've got some excellent speakers joining us. We've got representation from the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. We've got the Wildlife Trust. We've got local scientists, naturalists and other experts. We've got our local councillors and farmers, and also views from the likes of Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth and the Soil Association too. So we've got some really good material to go through tonight, and we really just want you to sit back, enjoy the presentations. These are going to last for about an hour, and we're then going to move on to a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. Please do engage, as Lisa just said in the video, with the chat function to submit any questions that you might have. So with that, I'm going to hand to our first virtual speaker tonight, Isabel Newport-Mangel, who's a local resident, and she is going to give an overview of the Seneca scheme.
My name is Isabel Newport-Mangel. I'm the 5th generation of my family. My name is Isabel Newport-Mangel. I'm the 5th generation of my family to live in this area, and I've lived in Chippenham for 30 years. Like most of the people who've engaged with the Seneca consultation, I'm very much in favour of renewable energy. But we will not support this model on this scale, nor in this context. My name is Isabel Newport-Mangel. I'm the 5th generation of my family to live in this area, and I've lived in Chippenham for 30 years. Like most of the people who've engaged with the Seneca consultation, I'm very much in favour of renewable energy. But we will not support this model on this scale, nor in this context. My name is Isabel Newport-Mangel. The consultation documentation doesn't appear to adequately convey the proportionality nor the scope of Seneca in relation to the wider context. From the number of solar farms that lie within 15 miles of our villages, you can see that this area is already well supplied. These appropriately sized and sited solar farms, lying a reasonable distance from neighbouring settlements and without battery installations, have been readily accepted through the local planning processes. The pie chart immediately demonstrates how colossal the current Seneca proposal is, and that its energy capacity is in a different league to the current local providers. No other solar plant on this scale exists in the UK. One of the largest of the current local installations is dwarfed by the area of land Seneca is proposing to take over. Productive farmland, diverse wildlife habitats, and local amenity land will be transformed and exposed to unnecessary risk to ensure that this model is, as its developers say, bankable. The installation that Seneca is proposing is not a farm, but a series of widely extended, enormous power plants capturing, transforming, storing and transporting energy on an industrial scale. The majority of these plants, as this map shows, lie right next to historic villages, right up to inhabitants' back gardens in the case of Worlington. Some lie close to more modern, increasingly densely populated settlements such as Red Lodge. Freckenham, Chippenham, Snell and Badlingham are all but completely surrounded. It is clear from our independent research that the majority of local inhabitants are simply not aware of how vast this proposal is, in terms of scale, disruption, and long-term, as yet unquantified, safety hazards. The Seneca power plant proposal is nothing like the energy farms with which we have become familiar.
Thank you, Isabel. Sorry for a few technical glitches there, but the message was very clear. We already have, or we will already have, nearly 20, we will already have 20 solar farms in this very small area alone. So within a 15-mile radius of the villages where we live. And it's amazing really to think that we already supply, or we will already be supplying, over 450 megawatts of solar electricity through these projects. So we're very much doing our bit towards the government's climate targets. And it's really unfair, we feel, of the government and of Sonica to expect the local communities here to take out another several thousand acres of their very, very valuable and productive agricultural land to provide an additional 500 megawatts of solar energy over and above the in excess of 450 megawatts that we will already be providing. And we are the breadbasket of Britain here. We are an area renowned for agriculture, and we do need to protect this. Now, unfortunately, the Sonica scheme isn't the only one of these industrial solar schemes in the UK and even across the globe, as you'll have seen earlier from our friends in Virginia in the States. And there's another one that was approved earlier than this year called the Cleve Hill Solar Facility. That was approved in Kent in May this year, and that is on 890 acres of farmland and marsh habitats. And then you've got the Sonica proposal, which we're obviously discussing tonight. And actually the same director, Matt Hazel, who is behind the Sonica proposal, is also involved in another project being discussed right now as we speak in Essex, in Chelmsford, called Longfield Solar. And again, that's on 1,400 acres of farming land and woodland. So clearly, these developers don't seem to respect or have any thought of preserving greenfield land in the UK. And there are actually many more of these schemes in the pipeline, both within the UK and across the globe. So this is a very worrying trend that we're seeing here now. There's a sudden surge of these huge scale solar power plants coming forward. And we really have to take a step back and think very carefully about what we're doing with our environment. So I'm going to hand over now to our first live guest of the evening. This is Mr. Andrew Fain, who is chairman of the Suffolk branch of the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. And he's going to give his views on this worrying trend and concerns about the Sonica proposal. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, good evening all, and I hope the technology is working cooperatively for me. Let me briefly introduce myself. I've been chairman of what is known as the Suffolk Preservation Society, but is also the county branch for CPRE. I've been chairman for 7 years. I am myself a Suffolk farmer, so I've got my feet in the soil there. And I'm a former deputy chairman of English Heritage, so I hope I know a bit about the planning world, although a lot of these developments are on new models. So SPS is non-political, self-funding. Our aim is to promote the conservation of Suffolk's physical and natural environment for the public benefit. And we're very happy in this instance to be working with you all to support you in this. I'm actually editing, as I speak to you, our most recent representation in respect on this consultation. Our most recent one was written 26th of November by our director, Fiona Cairns, who's a highly qualified planner in her own right. So let's get it out of the way. We recognize the imperative for the transition to low carbon energy and renewable energy. Of course, we accept that general premise. But, and there are big buts, are there not, in all these projects? And I'll just run down a summary of the key points we've been making since we first responded in July 2019 to this Sonica public consultation. Failure to select a sequentially preferable brownfield site in favour of this site, significant harm to the pattern of the historic landscape, adverse impact on the public rights-of-way network, adverse impact on residential amenity and visual amenity, a lack of detail throughout the PEIR report, namely insufficient information on size, scale and detail, insufficient information on site selection, on landscape and visual impact, embedded mitigation through good design, inadequate, insufficient archaeological information, inaccurate or incomplete maps, visualizations and photo montages, and no information regarding legacy benefits or an environmental fund. So there's a whole series of charges that we throw at this application, and we think that the DCO process must give serious consideration to. Perhaps most strongly, we object to the selection of unallocated greenfield land over brownfield sites. If this development, or one like it, were to be sited on genuine brownfield, it would be very hard to dispute it relatively. The sort of brownfields that are often used are real World War II airfields. Of course, you've got to be careful. There are an awful lot of World War II airfields are themselves ploughed up for arable now, but they are nonetheless brown in that they have been developed and very often have all manner of residual development components. I think one of the most material points, which isn't, if you like, quite strictly a planning point, is that point about the loss of productive arable land. And I know this area, your area, although I come from the east of the county, and I know it is prime land. And I just quote from an absolutely current article in this week's Country Life, which I dare say many of you read. There's a very good, serious article offered on planning, written by somebody under the pseudonym of Agronomies. I happen to know who Agronomies is, and he's a very influential former politician. I won't disclose his name, but he is very influential in this world. And he's talking about the agriculture bill. Not quite the same point, but a key point he makes. We all welcome the emphasis on sustainability and biodiversity, he says, but we still need to feed people. There's nothing particularly sustainable or environmentally friendly in importing even more of our food. And clearly, Sonica, taking out such a large acreage of prime land, must lead to a significant increase, material increase in food. Worth recollecting, we only grow currently about 60% of our own food in Britain. So, as he says, ignoring these facts won't make them go away. Yet the government has relaunched its agricultural policy without answering any of these pressing questions. So there's somebody powerfully on our side and absolutely hot off the press. What we say, reverting to our own representation, is that the meandering and eccentric boundary of the selected site at Sonica gives rise to significant landscape, visual, and residential amenity impacts, and is a matter that must be fully assessed by the environmental information. So we consider this development is not acceptable, that the alternative sites assessment will be only submitted at the DCO stage. That is far too late. The SPS does not support the principle of losing productive agricultural land on such a vast scale. It is industrialization of a large swathe of landscape, and it is encroaching upon a number of rural settlements. Your landscape, as you well know, was a creation of the enclosures in the 18th century. It has considerable history on its side. It is very well settled, very well established, and much loved by many people who live there and others who visit. And of course, there will be, you know better than I do, a significant loss of 5 public rights of way during the construction phase, which will be long. We're talking about serried ranks of panels which pay no regard to the landscape. They are alien features, a visual impact of the industrializing effects of this layout. It is understood this scheme will be the largest solar farm in Europe. It should therefore be all the more important that it be an exemplary scheme, and this is not. National policy, and this is in the National Policy Statement for Energy EN1, emphasises the importance of good design, which includes siting and being sensitive to place. These are the key means of minimising the harmful impacts of energy infrastructure on the landscape. There is, of course, archaeological sensitivity on this site. Much greater levels of survey work must be carried out archaeologically before the environmental statement stage is reached. Finally, we would say that in a case as big as this, there should be provision for a legacy fund, or indeed an environmental fund, or a community fund. Remember that this particular solar farm will have a finite life, perhaps 25 years before the equipment becomes no longer sustainable or possibly becomes obsolete. Will there be restoration of this landscape? If any of you wonder why not, well, go to Bradwell Power Station. Clearly the power station still stands, although it's no longer in use, the nuclear power station. But right beside it is a massive substation which has been derelict for some years, and it stands and looks like standing for a long time. So there is no expectation, I'm afraid, that the developers who build this site and take the proceeds and profits from it will commit to restoring the site to its pristine agricultural state when it is obsolete. If I could just give you one piece of advice additional to anything I have said in attempts to be helpful, and it is the more that you can work together with other bodies also opposing this development, the better your case will be, and the stronger your chances of making an impact. I'm very pleased to have supported you tonight. I'm very pleased to be working with CPRE Cambridge, our good friends there. We have to unite on these developments. We have to see it across county boundaries and indeed planning boundaries. And we have to strive to balance out, to outweigh the public benefit that does come from renewable energy by demonstrating the very real harm that a development like this will do. I'll be happy to support you in any future ways I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And we really, really do appreciate your support and reiterate what you said. It is absolutely vital that we protect the farming land around here for this generation, for the next generation and the generations to come. So really, thanks very much for your input. And we're going to hear a little bit more now from about what farming actually means to this area. We're so privileged, as Andrew just said. We live in a beautiful part of the UK. It's a lovely rural area, and farming plays such a crucial role to our local economy here. And we're really proud to support them. They help in our communities, not just as food providers, but they're environmental stewards. They are custodians of the land. And it's the farmers who are the ones who go out and manage the grass verges around here. It's the farmers that go out and manage the hedgerows. In the event of snowfall or other blockages, they're the ones who go out and clear the roads for us. And that community support that they offer is so vitally important. And it's something that a solar company cannot possibly do. And so I'm going to hand you over now to our next video guest. This is Anthony Hagan, who is a local farmer here. And I interviewed him earlier. And this is what he has to say about his passion for farming and the importance to this area. How important is farming to you?
It's very important to me. It's something that I've been doing now all my life, since agricultural college. My parents were in it, my grandparents were in it. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to work in several different parts of it. And now in the sugar beet world, when I'm renting land, it's, you know, you just get a feel for nature and for the countryside. It's not just important for the food that we have as an island, but it's also important for the countryside management that we do to the land as well.
How do you feel about your the role that plays in the community?
There still is a great community spirit, and if you look at the work that's done, the management of footpaths, the management of hedgerows, All this is done by the farming community, and it benefits the local, the footpaths. You know, because there are wildlife strips around, we get birds and you get insects, and it's a whole food chain that is being provided. And the diversity of crops we have around here in our parish is phenomenal. You know, we're doing potatoes, we're doing sugar beet, we're doing wheat and barley, we're doing parsnips, we're doing carrots, you know, beetroot. The whole thing is just the kind of diversity of industries we're supporting by having this agricultural land is immense. And with industry comes employment, and with employment comes spending, and the wheels keep going round and round, because it all starts with putting something in the ground. I'm a crop production manager for British Sugar. The sugar beet that's grown in the UK averages circa 30 miles, no more, from the factory. It's grown by British farmers. It's used, the tractors are bought in England, the fuel, the barns, all the equipment has come from British farming. And then we use British hauliers to take it the short distance on food miles. As food miles go, sugar from the place of production, i.e. the field, to where it's manufactured is really good. And it's something that, when we talk about environmental benefits, it's good cover, it's good for wildlife and everything. The geese that come into the Norfolk coast and all the wetlands around Welney, they all feed on the sugar beet tops and everything. It's really important for the whole environment and industry. It's a great crop, and it's a British industry which we should be proud of. One thing on that, we are the most efficient producers of sugar in the world. You know, it is something that we can be really proud of, because there's not a lot of waste. The co-products that come from it go back to the soil. Any stone that's delivered is treated and then put into you know, another use of either filling roads up or tracks up or something like that. The topsoil that comes in with the beet is washed off and then is put back on the land and sold as topsoil. So it creates extra industries, not just the sugar industry. And also there's when we're talking about energy, as we have at Bury St Edmunds plant, we have an AD plant which runs from the waste products we have. So what we're doing for the countryside and for the environment is a pretty complete circle. You know, at the moment there's lots of talk about the new agricultural bill, and it's heavily led towards the environment. And so it's, you know, we as farmers, we get graded almost on, you know, the 6 meter margins around these fields, putting in a woodland, putting in wild bird cover mixes which feed the birds over the winter. There's a lot we do for it, but also, you know, we're trying to now be a lot more bespoke with our use of chemicals and everything. We're trying to make sure the plant breeding, what we're having now, is the tolerance to viruses is coming along, the tolerance to diseases. We're building up a better profile all the time. And so the science, which in the UK is leading in agriculture, we are phenomenally good at scientists coming to this country and making either plants or chemistry that is better or safer, and which benefits the environment. I love it. I sit in my office or walk around. My office is farmland, and I can walk around and drive around it, and you'll see hundreds of different species, because it's an open corridor. They can migrate. There's no fencing to stop them. There's trees, there's woodland, there's grassland. It caters for all, not just a monoculture that the solar panels might do. We do have quite a green and pleasant land, as they say in the song. So you know, it's something to cherish and something to value, and we can be stewards of this land for decades to come. We're not an industry that's just here to create some power with a big plant and then disappear into the ether, leaving who knows what behind. It's our legacy as agricultural stewards is to look after the land for our next generations and the generation after that, and so on. It's a duty and a responsibility that we all take very seriously, and we're very proud to do.
Thanks so much, Anthony. And yeah, I mean, that's quite powerful. He's a steward of the land. He's looking to preserve this legacy of farmland for our future generations. And the legacy is not just for people. It's the legacy for the wildlife. It's a legacy for the environment. It's much more than a solar plant can ever offer. And it's really clear that farming in this area plays it's embedded in the community. It plays such a vital role in our local economy on all levels. So thank you so much for that piece there. Now, not only do these solar schemes have a detrimental impact on local communities and farming communities, but they have a potentially devastating effect on wildlife. And it is absolutely impossible to have a construction project on this size and scale without wildlife loss. It just cannot happen. And we really, really need to stand together today for preservation. That is preserving the species that we have here and encouraging them, the increase in abundance of them. Not mitigation, not these funny wildlife compensation schemes, which seems to be what Seneca are proposing to do, but actually preserving what we have, increasing the abundance and having it there for our future generations to come. So with that, on the topic of wildlife, I'm going to hand to our next live speaker tonight, who is Martin Baker, and he's here representing the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire branch of the Wildlife Trust, and he's going to talk more about his concerns with this proposal.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the wildlife that you as local people will see every day and that you know, and also that Anthony, previous speaker, was able to share. You live and work in the area and you know far more than I do, sort of living in Cambridge, what you see every day on your doorstep. So I'm not going to cover sort of some of the details of the wildlife on this occasion, but rather perhaps concentrate on some of the key points to do with the Seneca proposals of where they have failed to properly consider sort of wildlife impacts. I haven't got time in 4 minutes to go through all the detail, but just a few broad areas. Catherine alluded to one there. Sustainable development should require that we follow the mitigation hierarchy. That starts with avoidance, avoiding important and sensitive areas, avoiding impacts on species that are sensitive to change of land use. Mitigation only comes second, and compensation of unavoidable impacts is a last resort. Unfortunately, in spite of Seneca's extensive wildlife surveys, and I'm not really going to criticise them too much for the level of surveys that they've actually done, but they haven't taken that information or taken the local knowledge that many of you out there will have and actually applied it to the design of their scheme. They simply put 2,700 acres or whatever it is of solar panels where they want to put them and then figured out what's left behind for wildlife. That will clearly have an impact on a wide range of species, flora, farmland birds, and rare species as well. And it's probably sort of, from the ecological point of view, we may have to focus on one or two that have perhaps slightly higher legal protection. That is not to play down the importance of the wide range of species and wildlife that you all see locally, but in planning terms, it can be a little constraining in the arguments that we make as to why something shouldn't happen for ecology. Also, I would say that actually there's not a lot of detailed information on the impacts of large-scale industrial solar farms on wildlife. And actually a lot of what Seneca says can't be backed up by evidence one way or the other. Some things are, however, clear. You're very lucky in this part of West Suffolk and East Cambridgeshire to actually be on the edge of the Brecks, which is one of the UK strongholds for an internationally important bird, the stone curlew. It sort of typically occurs on sort of a mixture of farmland and the typical Breckland heath and acid grasslands. And within the Seneca area, there are 5 pairs recorded breeding, and each pair requires a considerable area of habitat, not just for its breeding area, but to feed. And there will undoubtedly be a loss of those species as a result of the construction of a industrial solar farm on this scale. Seneca may claim that they can create alternative habitats for the stone curlews, but unless they're in place beforehand and well beforehand, before any cable is put in the ground and before any construction digger starts work, it's pointless. There are a wide range of other species present that will also be impacted, though it's hard to categorize exactly how many. there's going to be loss of priority grassland habitats that should technically be protected through planning. There's a wide range of rare arable flora out in the fields, sort of as a result of the farming practices undertaken by the local landowners. Many of those are going to be lost and won't be compatible with a solar farm. Overall, the approach to the ecological and environmental impact assessment has simply failed to follow best practice, and throughout it understates the impacts on wildlife of this scheme. The habitat creation proposals may sound quite generous to compare with some developments, but actually they're not when you look at the overall scale of it. They're piecemeal, they're pretty vague, they won't be in place before the development starts. Where's the wildlife going to go in the meantime? Finally, looking at some of the compensatory habitats, there's absolutely no guarantee that these will be well managed through a solar company. And that will sort of echo some of the things that Anthony was saying beforehand about how farmers can be custodians of the land and how they know and respect the land, having worked there for many, many generations. Simply put, I don't know where to start really. It should be a sustainable renewable energy scheme. It's the worst I've seen in many years. Ultimately, though, I think as other speakers have said, this is going to be a political decision. I'll say good luck with your campaign. Much of the wildlife that you know and you're going to miss, unfortunately, is not going to be considered when the planning inspectors and the ministers look at this as a nationally significant infrastructure scheme. The stone cutters might play a part in stopping it. Much of the rest of it, unfortunately, probably will be dismissed by the planners and the planning inspectors and ministers. I hate saying that as an ecologist and someone who loves wildlife, but it is the brutal reality. So you need to bring all the strands of your argument together to really fight this. But one final personal thought, as someone who's trying to sort of think about putting some solar panels on my own roof, wouldn't it be better if the number of solar panels that were proposed for this Sonica site were actually put on 100,000 homes or buildings instead? That seems to me a far more sustainable use of the resources and a much better way of doing solar renewable energy. So slightly off piste at the end, but good luck to you all. And I'm afraid I do need to leave because my daughter is downstairs and I can rather hear her in the background, and I hope you haven't. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. And we're really pleased to have your support. I'm definitely there with you on the solar suggestion. And yes, very much feels like wildlife is a bit of an afterthought, or very much an afterthought with the Sonica proposal. So I'm just going to move on to our next guest. There's a very specific and very special wildlife habitat that lies right in the middle of one of the Sonica East, the Sonica boundaries, and that's in the Sonica East A site, and it's called the Lee Brook, and it is brimming with wildlife. So we asked a local water biologist, Tony Weston, to talk a little bit more about the site and the species that live there.
Hi, my name's Tony Weston. I'm a local water naturalist. It's always been my passion for years. And I'm particularly concerned about Sonica and the area around the Lee Brook. Of all the places I've ever come across, the Lee Brook is probably the best pond dipping place for children that I've ever come across. It's just so many species there that can be explored by kids in 2 inches of water. What I want to say about the Lee Brook is it is a really important area for the environment. The Lee Brook is in 2 separate areas in the Sonica area, which is below the bridge on the Isleham Mildenhall Road and above the bridge where there's a little gauging weir run by the EA. The lower stretch of it is a very important spawning area for the fish from the River Lark. They come up the channel. I've seen chub go up the channel. The result of that is that the lower area has quite a few fish in what's to all intent and purpose a fry nursery. What is very important, there must be the ability and the commitment to keeping that watercourse open. They must be able to remove both the silt and the vegetation which tends to overgrow it at all stages. This area has brook lampreys in it, and also bullheads, stony loach, minnows, 10-spined and 3-spined stickleback. The spine loach, the brook lamprey and the bullhead are all protected species. The spine loach live in mud and only come out at night, and they're incredibly rare, but the habitat is perfect for them. The area is also home to water voles. It has a regular little egret and heron. Keeping the river free of silt is a very important thing. The panels go straight up the hill on the village side above the weir. There will be silting in the first field on the right as you're going upstream. There will be rows and rows and rows of panels. All these will be dripping and the water will be going downhill in rivulets. Those rivulets will put the silt down and into the river. There's no way of stopping it. So the only last thing to say is about the panels. Over 40 years, there's got to be some leaking of material from the panels, and they will contaminate the whole of the area that the panels sit on. This is heavy metal and rare metals and particularly nasty stuff, which will leach out. All of that will get into the ecosystem. It certainly get into the soil. It could run off into the Lee Brook. It could contaminate the River Lark, and the odds are it will be in the form of a sediment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tony. And yes, it's amazing, isn't it, really, just to think how many protected species we have here right on our doorstep. Along the way, while we've been going through this consultation process, we've engaged with so many different parties to get their thoughts on huge-scale solar power schemes and specifically this Seneca proposal. And we've had some feedback from Greenpeace Cambridge, who consider the solar plants on this scale to be hugely inappropriate and destructive, and that they emphasize this whole point about our connection with nature, which we have a very strong connection with nature in this community, and it must not be lost. Friends of the Earth, a very similar comment, both recognizing that solar farms and solar panels do have a role to play in our green future, but they have to be developed sensitively, and they have to be developed with care for the wildlife, which, as you heard from Martin Baker, isn't the case with this situation. And they have genuine concerns with these large solar schemes, and particularly the sort of cumulative effect in the landscape. And we're very conscious of that, having got 20 of these in the pipeline for this region already, in addition to this scheme. So I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, live speaker, Lisa Bowman. She is a director at Elvedon Farms, and she's going to talk to us more about the wildlife in this area, but also the destruction of another hugely valuable asset that we have in this area, and that's our soil.
Thank you, Catherine. Firstly, I'm going to touch on a few of the protected species that we have. We've already heard a little bit about one of those, which is the stone curlew. It migrates here in the spring and then leaves again in the autumn. It comes here to breed. And interestingly, it's a ground nesting bird. The only defense it has is against its predators is to hunker down and hide. As you can see from the little photo, its feathers are sort of mottled brown colour, meaning it blends in very nicely with the soils. They build their nests in open ground, in wide open spaces. The reason being they need to be able to see far, far away to see predators coming, so that they can take action when they do see their predators coming. For this reason, they nest on heathlands, grasslands and fields. They're especially keen on onion and potato fields because the canopy of those crops comes much later than, say, a wheat crop. So it's nice and open when they're busy setting their nests, and they like to get in the divots of those fields, and they're very happy there, I can assure you. They will not nest under solar panels because they won't be able to see far enough away so they lose all their natural defences. They will have to go somewhere else, and that's a fact. They will therefore lose significant nesting grounds if this scheme were to go ahead, as we heard from Martin a while ago. There's another two birds I'd just like to bring to your attention, and that's the marsh harrier and barn owls. Marsh harriers are in the area, and they're quite rare. Both of these are protected species. They're aerial hunters, as I'm sure you know, and the problem with a solar panel site is that their hunting ability is impaired by these solar panels, and I'm in no doubt that this will lead to a decline in their numbers. There are other rare and protected plant species in the area, and the efforts that are taken by some farms and estates to actually protect these species, protect the stone curlew, encourage barn owls and marsh harriers, is quite incredible. And to think that a company can come along, ignore all of that, and cover it in panels and destroy their natural habitat is quite awful, frankly. I'm going to move on now, on that jolly note, to talk a little bit about soil. So we take it very much for granted. It's actually as old as the universe. Some of it comes from meteorites that date back from when the Earth was first created. And it's got lots of things in it. So it's got the organic matters, it's got minerals, it's got worms and gases and water. And this is all mixed up to create the soil that we see. And every aspect of it is very important. Soil carries out a range of functions and services which human life would not be possible without it. It obviously provides an environment for our plants, so food crops, timber, to grow in. They anchor their roots in there. The soil stores the nutrients, enabling them to grow. Water, depending on soil type, maybe some, maybe a lot. And it enables these plants to actually grow, for our food to grow. It also filters out and cleans our water to help prevent natural hazards such as flooding. And it also contains an incredible amount of biodiversity. Only 1% of the microorganisms found in the soil have actually even been identified, and I'll leave you to read the slides, but as you can tell, there's more than 7 billion organisms in 1 tablespoonful of soil. You wouldn't imagine it was quite so diverse. It also holds nearly 10 billion tonnes of carbon, so it's important in terms of carbon and management of carbon. The healthy soils will prevent floods, and it mitigates the effects of drought. If it's in a good structure, which if we talk about agricultural soil that's well structured, it'll have solids, air, it'll have water, and it'll typically have a consistency of around 50% solids, 25% air and 25% water, roughly. Depends on the soil type. It can be damaged by poor land management. It can be damaged by heavy mechanical machines going over it. It can be damaged by being overgrazed. So if I talk about it being damaged, what I'm really talking about mostly is it's compacted. And when it becomes compacted, one, it's not very productive because your roots can't get into it. And you start to destroy the microorganisms because it's an ecosystem effectively, and it needs every aspect of it to work well. If it gets compacted as well, then it'll also reduce the ability of the water to infiltrate and drain through the soils. This will increase surface runoff and increases the risk of flooding, and you lose your topsoils. You can see on one of my slides that it takes, I'm going to move it on, it takes 1,000 years for a single centimetre of topsoil to form. So you can't get it back very easily. The other big issue that we have with this potential scheme is underneath the panels, because underneath the panels you're not going to get any light, you're not going to get any water, therefore you're not going to get any plant life. So you're going to end up with very dead, very inert soils there. trying to bring those back to life. As I've said, it takes 1,000 years to actually create a centimetre of topsoil, so it's no easy task. I'd like to just touch on a little bit about modern farming practices. Farms are often criticised for being too intensive and for damaging soils. There's so much work that does go on to improve soils. It's in the interest of the farms in any case, but it's in the interest of the whole environment. So quite often, till or very light tilling regimes are employed to prevent the loss of organic matter and to disturb the soil as little as possible. Pollinator headlands are actually planted, which encourage insects. Biological methods are used ever more to manage pests and diseases, and this reduces the amount of chemicals that are needed. This is an example of a flower margin that's been planted to encourage the insects. We also plant cover crops, which are then ploughed back in. These again are there to improve the soil and increase the organic matters that are in there. My last slide gives you a quote from the Soil Association, and the quote says, "We do not support large-scale solar farms if they take up large areas of good quality agricultural land." I hope that whiz through has given you an overview and something to think about. We're now going to pass you back to Catherine, who will continue with the chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was a really good overview of the wildlife and particularly the soil. I never realised it was such a complex thing. And what an amazing fact. 1 centimetre of topsoil takes 1,000 years to develop, but yet can be really quickly and easily destroyed by compaction. Large, heavy vehicles, i.e. construction vehicles, can very, very easily and quickly destroy this topsoil that's so very precious to this area. And we really, really must do all that we can to protect it, because 1,000 years is a very long time to wait for it to come back. Can I just ask anybody who's looking on Facebook or YouTube, please do submit some questions as you go along. Use the chat functionality to do that. So when you read the WWF's website, one of the top things they recommend as individuals that we can do to help slow climate change is to try and source our produce locally. And we're really proud in this area to have so many farm shops, farmers markets, and we love supporting our local farmers who are so passionate about what they do in providing food for the area. And you know, if we don't farm here in an area where, as Lisa said, we have some amazing soil here, and if we don't farm here in the breadbasket of Britain, where is the food going to come from? Food imports, as Andrew mentioned earlier, land clearance in other parts of the world who are going to be asked to clear their land to satisfy our demand for food, and that will have knock-on effects with the local wildlife and environment in their parts of the world. So we really need to think very carefully about preserving our highly productive and highly valuable farming land here. And we spoke earlier to a retired local farmer, Roy Clark, who's going to give us his views now on how he feels about farming.
In 1911, my father came to this village as a Bernardes boy to live with a local family who befriended him. He was a local farmer who taught him how to work the land, and on retirement the farmer sold his farm to my father. Subsequently, I also worked on the land. We grew all horticultural crops: celery, cauliflower, carrots and cabbage, which we then took to London markets and had a delivery round Cambridge, which we went twice a week. We farmed the land very close to the site that Sonica proposed to put more solar panels on. Panels could be put on industrial buildings, and the government should say on residential property. This is good agricultural land, and I know things have to change, But this must, and I emphasise the word must, not be allowed to happen when we come out of Europe. Where will we be? It is vitally, and I stress vitally, important that we protect the productive agricultural land to feed our nation. And I'm sorry I keep looking away because I'm very annoyed over this, but this just must not happen, because you can't eat electrical things, and we do need food first. So I am challenging you all. You are not considering the health of the nation. We need solar power, yes, but you can find brownfield sites or whatever to put it on.
Wonderful. Very well said, Roy, and really very emotional. And it just shows how passionate people feel about farming around here and the farmers themselves. So wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand you straight over now to another live guest, who is a local farmer, Nick Wright, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the amazing land that we have in this region.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for letting me talk to you this evening. And my goodness, difficult man to follow, Roy. That was absolutely brilliant. I've been lucky enough to live in this area for 20 years and farm here. And where I'm coming from and my opposition to Sonica is quite simply, best and most versatile farmland is not available all around the country. Farmland is graded from grade 1, which is the very best, to grade 5, which is the very worst. And the government policy stipulates that between grade 1 and grade 3A, industrial solar farms and the like should not be put on this land. It should be protected because it is able to grow a huge range of crops, as Anthony has already pointed out. Our land in this area, the 2,700 acres of Sonica's proposal, falls squarely within the grade 2 and grade 3A. And this is further enhanced by the fact that all of this land has irrigation to it. So when we have very wet winters and we're unable to get on the land, we in East Anglia, where it's drier, can get on the land. When we have very dry springs, we are able to water with our irrigation systems to keep our crops growing. And there are not many farming areas that have these fantastic facilities, and we are hugely lucky. Therefore, I believe that we need to stick to our guns and stop Sonica putting their solar panels on this very, very good farmland. At one point, I would say that, as Anthony said earlier, we're 60% self-sufficient only in the food that we produce. And this year, in 2020, our wheat harvest was 5 million tons short of our annual consumption. And I think we have to realize that that has basically blocked Liverpool Dock, I think, for the last 3 months, continually bringing wheat in from the EU, which will become ever more complicated from January onwards, to bolster up the supplies that we don't have. This land is farmland, not solar land. And thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk to you.
Wow, that's a huge shortfall in wheat, and again emphasizes how important it is that we keep farming where we can here. So moving on now, we all know how wonderful it feels to be out in the open countryside, enjoying the fresh air and wonderful views, and we're so lucky here to have that on our doorstep. Settlers have been in this area for many, many centuries, and we've got extensive multi-period archaeological remains here, Neolithic, Bronze Age, Roman, all sorts. And evidence of these settlements is all around us, and it's accessible. You often see people here out at the weekends with metal detectors looking across the fields trying to detect some buried artifacts. And we will lose this access to this open countryside if Sonica goes ahead, because the fields of panels and the battery stores are going to be fenced off. They will be inaccessible to the public. And this is a massive change in our local landscape. And when asked about the impact of Seneca on this region, you can see from the slides, Suffolk archaeology talked about wholesale destruction of the archaeological landscape. That's huge. Historic England talked about significant impacts on the many heritage assets that we have in this area. And we really can't sit back and just let that happen. So I'm going to hand to you now to our next live speaker, who's Isabel Cross, and she is a local campaigner for mental health. And she's going to tell us a lot more about how important it is to have open and accessible countryside for our health and well-being.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Our mental health and well-being has never been more important as we're living through the ups and downs of a pandemic. In planning, this importance is actually recognised in the National Planning Policy Guidelines, and the intentions of those guidelines are also endorsed by Public Health England. Mind the Mental Health charity, who I work for, knows that spending time in green spaces and bringing nature to everyday life benefits us both physically and mentally. It has a range of evidence on how being outdoors in the open air and in open spaces improve our mood, reduces stress, helps our confidence and self-esteem, for example. We currently, as Catherine's mentioned, have uninterrupted views due to our low-lying terrain. It's unique. We often refer to other people and say, come and see our big skies. It's something special to us. It's a very specific beauty and we are proud to live within it. And yes, surprisingly, our well-being is all in a view. It really is. Research on human cognitive function and mental health benefits have identified different distinctions between those benefits for physical activity and for visual benefits. So it really has been proven that it is in the view, and we have tremendous views here. The other thing about mental health is we know there is an awful lot about connecting with other people, something we've been deprived of the last 8 months. Connecting with other people and actually giving to our communities. And I think one of the things for living around here is that we choose to invest ourselves in our communities. We invest our time and our talents. We support initiatives and local businesses. We invest in our family's health by living here. A very recent study points to the fact that 55% less mental health disorders occur in children that are brought up in the countryside. And this is a recent longitudinal study done in Denmark. We have our culture, our farmers markets, our faith communities, our joint parishes, our equestrian heritage, and we give a lot to things. And that effort of giving is known to help our mental well-being and help us feel connected. Cambridge County Council has even formed its new Think Communities strategy based on some evidence from nurture developments that connectivity builds resilience and resilience goes on to support well-being. So unsurprisingly to me, actually, our connected communities right here do reflect as slightly healthier than the East as a whole, and that in turn healthier than the UK. And that's actually been acknowledged in Seneca's own health assessment in their PEI report. Yet you can see from the plan and the maps you saw earlier that there's almost a physical wedge in there driven between us in their planning. It separates our communities away. Planning policy nationally says that neighbourhood ecosystems and co-benefits should be taken into account in any sort of planning. And it talks about having policies that facilitate walking and cycling. And people have already mentioned the loss of some of the footpaths or the diversion of them, recreation of them at a later stage, them being permissive as opposed to having open public access. And one of the big things around here is cycling. Most of our lanes don't have pavements. And of course, we're going to be subjected to a lot of heavy lorry movements for over 2 years during construction. So the impact on us and our well-being through that is going to be huge. I think people haven't even got as far as thinking about that. Mental health and renewables, there's just some research out in renewable energy that has says that our belief systems and the things about our culture and the things we've been talking about in our community must be taken into account. And at present, in the Sonica documentation, these topics only receive glancing notice. They focus on the technical, and they have no aspect about people itself. In fact, they have been referring to us in all of the webinars as receptors of impact, not as human beings. So it's really, really important that we fight for these things that are in planning to actually get through to the people that matter. Lastly, how does our countryside help us heal post-COVID? Well, 8 months of lockdown, I don't know about you, but the opportunity I've had to step straight out into a footpath, into a garden, down a paddock has been my saviour. And that cannot be measured. The lack of connectivity through COVID has increased mental health issues. I see that in my work, and also has made it very difficult for people who are in mental health crisis. What I would say is the burden of this consultation, as I talk to people, has exacerbated poor mental health, not just by the overwhelming scale of the project itself, but by the prospect of potential loss, almost bereavement of what our community has now and how we use it to stay mentally healthy. So retaining this land really is important for our health and our well-being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. And yes, let's hope we can do that. So we're going to change tack ever so slightly now. We've been told a lot by Boris Johnson that we need to build back greener, and in order to meet the 2050 climate targets. And you know, there's no doubt that that absolutely has to happen. But as you've been hearing so far, there's absolutely nothing green whatsoever about this Sonica proposal. We're talking about millions of solar panels being produced across the globe, a long way away in parts of the world where forced labour is often an issue, and transporting millions of those panels along our roadways into these rural communities, and mining for the cobalt for the use in these battery energy storage systems. All of these things have a carbon footprint, and we've been asking Sonica repeatedly throughout the consultation, at what point will this project become net zero in terms of carbon emissions? And they don't have an answer. They haven't yet given an answer. So they don't actually know. And yes, we need to build back greener. We all accept that, and we have to do that. But we need to do this in a smart and sustainable way. And our previous guests have alluded to that as well. We don't have to choose between energy security and food security just yet. There are other solutions. And if we look at our neighbouring countries, in Germany, for example, over 70% of their solar installations are on rooftops. And they generate a huge 50 gigawatts of electricity, which is way more than we're currently producing in the UK from our rooftop and ground-mounted installations combined. I think that's currently about 14 gigawatts. And I spoke to the National Solar Centre in the UK, and according to them, it's a no-brainer for companies to have solar panels on their rooftops. It's something that just should be happening. And yet we have over 250,000 hectares, that's over 600,000 acres of south-facing commercial rooftops in the UK with no solar panels on them. And surely we should be using these first before we resort to destroying vast areas of greenfield land for solar use. So in this area, we're lucky. We've got some great solar schemes in process, and I'm going to welcome our next guest, live speaker, Lance Stanbury, who is the local candidate for the Mildenhall division of West Suffolk Council, and he's going to talk to us more about some of these schemes.
Thank you, Catherine, and good evening, everyone. As you said, the theme of my contribution tonight is that I believe there really does exist a very real alternative to the Sonica solar farm, and that its proposal as it currently stands. I also believe that its current proposal contravenes the government's own UK solar PV strategy, which was published in October 2013, and it was entitled A Roadmap to a Brighter Future. Now, Sonica is quite clearly a commercial enterprise, and understandably, that company has chosen what they see as the easiest option, that is to offer lucrative payments to landowners so that they can pave over our agricultural landscape in order to generate and maximize their financial return, whilst blighting the lives of many local people who will only experience the disbenefits. Now, the government will ultimately determine this proposal, as we've heard, and I'm delighted that we've seen only today that the local MPs, Matt Hancock and Lucy Fraser, will be working inside government to oppose this development where clearly it will be determined. And to support them, they can point to their own government's policy, which demonstrates that this development violates all of its key principles, which state that support for solar PV should ensure that proposals are appropriately cited, that they're given, that proper weight is given to environmental considerations such as landscape, visual impact, heritage, and local amenity, and we've heard a lot about that this evening. And also to provide opportunities, real opportunities for local communities to influence the decisions that affects them, which clearly we can't, or we're not being able to, because it's being determined at a national governmental level. So our MPs need to argue that their own government's policy confirms that the need for renewable low carbon energy does not automatically override environmental protections, and we have many in our area, as we've heard. And of even more relevance, I believe, they should be pointing to the policy which states that the cumulative impact actually requires serious attention, especially the increasing impact of large-scale solar farms, which are having a devastating effect on our local landscape and our local amenity, as the number of arrays in our area increases, as we've seen wherever we look, really, to be honest. Also, the government policy says that local topography is an important factor. That's that flat topography that we've heard about, when assessing whether large-scale solar farms could have a damaging effect on the landscape. And the government policy recognises that the impact can be just as great, predominantly on flat landscapes such as ours, as much as hilly and mountainous landscapes. To date, Sonica, I believe, has not provided sufficient impact assessments to actually justify their proposals. And finally, the government's policy says that great care should be taken to ensure that heritage assets are conserved in a manner appropriate to their significance, including the impact of proposals on views important to their setting. And here in West Suffolk and indeed in East Cambs, we have many ancient settlements whose heritage will be blighted by surrounding them with this solar array. So what are the alternatives? And we've heard a few tonight. After all, most of us, of course, are truly in support of the growth of renewable energy, but there are alternatives. One in which I was personally involved is covering the unused roofs of commercial properties with solar panels. I mean, did you actually know that in a recent study, it suggested that covering 61% of the UK's south-facing commercial roofs with solar PV could actually provide all the energy needs for UK businesses, saving medium-sized and larger enterprises at least £30,000 a year on energy bills. Now, this would reduce significantly the need to cover our green fields with solar panels. When I was Cabinet Member for Planning and Growth on West Suffolk Council, I was privileged to promote the Council's innovative Solar for Business scheme. The roof panels, as Martin Baker referenced earlier on, are placed on commercial buildings, and they not only provide clean energy for the hosting company, saving them an average of around £20,000 a year locally, but it also provides the council with an income which was then reinvested in local services for the community. Sonica's proposal will provide nothing for our local community. Unlike Sonica's proposal, West Suffolk Council's scheme is very popular, and they now support over 30 organisations, and this currently generates £125,000 a year to support local services. Indeed, schemes like this, plus the council's very own solar farm, the Togham solar farm development, which in itself actually produces over 11.5 megawatt hours of electricity per year, and that's a 1.2 million pounds of gross income. And this, we ensured, was built at least 2 miles away from the nearest residence in Lakenheath. And this has ensured that West Suffolk residents are all actually living within a carbon neutral local authority. So this explodes the myth that we need Sonica to add to the country's carbon neutral status, when our very own council is doing this already and supporting local services at the same time through the income that this generated. So there really is a real alternative that will actually help the local community rather than just helping the shareholders of Sonica. I believe the Sonica proposal is completely inappropriately cited. It does not give the proper weight to environmental considerations, and little opportunity is being given to local communities to actually influence the decision that affects us all. It contravenes the government's own policies set out in the PV strategy, and therefore should and is being rightly resisted. I've been speaking recently with local campaigners about resurrecting the idea of a community march, COVID permitting, of course, through our affected villages in the new year to demonstrate publicly the strength of feeling of local people. That's local people who have done nothing wrong, but are being sentenced to a generation of incarceration inside the power plant. So there are alternatives, and I congratulate everyone in this campaign who is working so hard to safeguard and defend our livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lance. That was brilliant, and a great summary of some of the schemes and also some of the failings of Sonica in putting this proposal together in terms of policy there. And over the board, obviously, this is a cross-border proposal. It affects East Cambridgeshire area as well as West Suffolk. And we have next as our speaker Mark Goldsack, who's with us in the studio, and he's from a councillor with Cambridge County Council, and he's going to also talk about some of the schemes that we have in relation to solar in this region. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you very much. Really interesting speakers on tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about what Cambridgeshire County Council is doing in the whole field of environmental and carbon world. Haven't got long, so I'm just going to focus on some of the projects which show you what I think are good use of solar as opposed to what we're hearing and seeing from Sonica. So we've developed the Cambridge's Energy Investment Unit, and it's made up of 4 strands. And fundamentally, these 4 strands are school programme, the County Council's buildings retrofit, renewable energy and storage, and community heating. And I'll quickly run through each of those. So the schools programme, this is where we are literally school by school walking through and retrofitting energy conservation measures into all schools to create guaranteed energy and financial savings. So in short, that's saying goodbye to fossil fuels, looking at air, ground and solar sourced power to replace them. The county buildings, we're doing exactly the same. You wouldn't think about it, but there are county council buildings, many all over the place, and not just those occupied by county council staff and workers, but we're also doing a retrofit program in there. Renewable energy storage, we already have, similar to the one in West Suffolk, we already have Triangle Farm, which is putting out 12 megawatts and has been working very, very well. We've just got planning permission to do what we call North Angle Farm, which is a further 29 megawatt farm. But what I'll pick up on something that Lance said, and he made an excellent point. This is actually in the middle of, I won't say nowhere because it's very important, but it's actually in the middle of land between Wicken and Soham. And even the people of Wicken and Soham don't realise it's there because it's, I wouldn't say it's unimportant. All land's important, but it's in a place that's not actually at people's back doors, which Sonica is doing. And that's quite frankly wrong. What we're also doing in the renewable energy and storage section is we're looking at sites such as Baberham and St Ives. These are the park and ride centres, and we've solar panelled all the roofs of those park and ride centres to capture that, not just for putting back into the grid, but also for the provision of electrical car charging points. And finally, we've got a government-backed project going on in Swaff and Baalbeck at the moment, which is a community scale project to shift an oil-based village onto renewable heating. What that means in short is we're building a ground source heat pump to service and provide green energy to the village of Swaffham Baalbek. Now, just going to go back onto the Triangle Farm and North Angle Farm. Sorry, the North Angle Farm, 29 megawatts. Just to put that into perspective, that's 14,000 homes worth of consumption, approximately. So what we're also looking at is not just taking that straight over to Burwell and plugging it into the grid. We're looking at all options as to use into farms, into schools, into local industries, so that we can provide them with cheaper green energy along the way. So as much as I'm probably a little bit left field in my presentation tonight, Catherine, hopefully that has given you an overview of what's going on in Cambridgeshire. If you want to know more about that, we've got a unique website for this area, and it's the Mobilising Local Energy Investment. So it's www.mlei.co.uk. Please take a look at that, and there'll be more projects added as they come on board. That's really all I've got to say tonight, other than I'm very, very pleased to see from parish councils right the way through to our MPs, everybody is standing on the right side of this argument. Thank you.
Exactly, Mark. We're all standing together, which is what we like to see. So thank you so much for that summary of projects in Cambridgeshire, and it really is, you know, there are some really exciting projects out there. So the Seneca scheme is going to actually be a giant energy trading plant, and what they're proposing to do is take energy, import energy from the grid into these giant batteries, and that energy is going to be solar energy, it's going to be energy from fossil fuels, and basically any surplus energy in the grid, they're going to suck it out, put it into their batteries, and then sell it back to the grid at a higher price when the demand is higher. And that is really the crux of the scheme. And the key part of this scheme to make that work is these huge lithium-ion battery energy storage systems. And this is how they're going to store and trade the energy. Now, we all know that energy is not really something that likes to be contained. And these batteries in particular have a very well-known, very well-documented fire risk with explosive potential. And as well as explosions, these battery fires emit large amounts of toxic gases. So I'm going to pass you straight on to our next live speaker, Dr. Edmund Fordham, and he's going to explain in more detail about how these batteries catch fire.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. Can everybody hear me? Good evening to everybody. The title slide, which I hope you can see, I did just a moment ago, but I'm not in control of this, is simply the acronym BESS. It doesn't mean Queen Elizabeth I. If you see BESS, it means a giant battery. So next slide, please. As Catherine was saying, the scheme isn't just a lot of solar panels in a field. It's also going to contain 3 very large compounds containing these battery energy storage systems. Catherine explained a bit about it. Up on the top right is one of the cartoons from the original Seneca consultation, which sort of implies that they're going to store the sunlight during the day in the batteries, so you can have that nice soft lighting and your television shows at night. We don't really think that's the way it's going to go, because of course it will be grid connected and there will be other sources of energy on the grid. It's more likely that they'll be storing stuff during the night time and then releasing it during the day, which is pretty much the opposite of what they've shown. So what does a battery actually look like? I've given you 2 photographs. One comes from the Seneca brochure. They don't even tell you where it is. They haven't said what the size is, either physically or in terms of electrical capacity. On the bottom right, I've given you a picture of the Hornsdale Power Reserve in South Australia, which at the time of its installation was the biggest in the world. That's currently got a capacity of nearly 200 megawatt hours of electrical energy. So if we can have the next slide, then how does this translate to Seneca? If you look at the maps that they've provided, then in red, which I've circled in the red loops, you've got 3 battery storage compounds in East A, East B, and West A. And these are, I've given the areas in terms of sizes of football pitches to give you an idea of the land that's involved. So, 7, 21, 15 football pitches in each case. The electrical capacity, extraordinarily, is not even stated by Sonica. We've written to them and they haven't actually replied. They haven't given an answer, that is. They've simply said, assume that those compounds are going to be filled with cabins. Well, if I do some of that and make some reasonable assumptions, then you could have over 300 of these battery storage cabins there, which would translate to a storage capacity of somewhere between 1.6 and 3 gigawatt hours of stored energy. And if I turn that into kilotons of TNT, it's somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 kilotons. And if I say that the Beirut explosion of August this year was reckoned by Sheffield University to be about 0.5 kiloton of TNT, that would give you an idea of the magnitude of the energy that could be stored in those cabins. Relative to the South Australia plant, it could be anywhere between 8 and 15 times the capacity. Now, we simply don't know whether that's really the capacity that they intend. They just haven't said, and they refuse to say. So in the next slide, please. The technology isn't even stated, although the Energy Institute says that the specific chemistry of the battery is very important for the planning process, simply because if something goes wrong and you have a major accident, the chemicals released will be different. So all we can really do is go with the lithium-ion technology, which is dominant in the industry to date. So next slide, please. What can go wrong? Catherine's talked a little bit about battery fires. The left-hand picture is a fire in Belgium in 2017. Much more up to date is the fire on the right, which was in Liverpool in September this year in a 20 megawatt battery storage system run by Ørsted. Took Merseyside Fire and Rescue 11 hours to bring that fire under control. We don't know exactly what went wrong because it's still under investigation. The report, they say, is due in the new year. They won't give us any details of what's going to be in it. Just to give you an idea of the magnitudes, though, on the numbers that I've guesstimated, Sonica East B could be 800 megawatt hours, which would be 40 times larger than the installation in Liverpool. Next slide, please. So finally, there is an interesting and very important event that took place in Arizona in 2019, important because it was very thoroughly investigated after the event. It's a very small battery relative to the sizes we're talking about, 2 megawatt hours of storage. And in fact, it was confined to just one rack out of 27 within a single cabin. And that was sufficient when that rack was consumed by a process called thermal runaway to create an explosive atmosphere, which did cause an explosion, which critically injured 4 of the firefighters who were tackling the incident. And the report that's very, very recent, hot off the press in July this year, identified thermal runaway as a hazard which is not protected by any current engineering standards. Now, I've used the phrase thermal runaway. What it means is that you only need a failure in a single cell for that cell to overheat. And if it doesn't have any protection and mitigation barriers in place, thermal barriers, then it can simply propagate to neighboring cells, because once they're above a temperature around about 150 degrees Celsius, then they too will fail. And that failure can then propagate not just to the whole module, but to the whole rack, which is exactly what seems to have worked in Arizona. Now, one of the important points about this is that it is a discharge of electrochemical energy. It isn't strictly speaking a fire because it doesn't need air. So that means that all the conventional firefighting techniques of suppression don't work. Fire suppressants will not work. The only means you've got of tackling it is to use water in a hope to cool it down. So next slide, please. So finally, I just list out here the inflammable gases, but also the toxic gases that are likely to be released in thermal runaway accidents in lithium-ion battery storage systems. The inflammables that caused the explosion in the previous fires and certainly in the Arizona event include hydrogen, methane, ethylene, carbon monoxide. The toxic gases, the most significant, I think, is hydrogen fluoride coming from the electrolytes and also the polymers used in the battery cells themselves. You can have an inventory of something like 2 tons in one cabin. And this is a gas that is toxic in parts per million. So if you had one of those cabins go up in smoke, there is a major public health hazard to people living nearby from a plume of toxic gases, which doesn't seem to me to have been properly investigated. So batteries, just to summarize, they're just fine if they do their job. Nothing will happen. You won't see anything except these cabins occupying the landscape. If they go wrong, there's a huge amount of stored energy behind it, which could do major damage. Thank you.
As a local resident, I worry most about safety.
It is a new technology in the form of it being applied at grid scale, and as the new technology applied at grid scale, there is a learning curve as to how it needs to be managed, and that's a steep learning curve. We haven't calculated what that explosion might potentially look like and what the fallout might be. And I think that's because we're not predicting that it would be like a mushroom cloud or a nuclear explosion. We don't expect that it would be anything like that sort of scale. I don't think that they would need an evacuation plan, but it's something that we will consider within the battery energy fire safety management plan. And if we will be consulting the health and safety executive and the local fire services on that. If the feedback is that they need a evacuation plan, we will put one in place. We would all feel terrible if thousands of people were killed.
Wow, it's quite a thought-provoking video that you've just seen there, and the voice you could hear in that slide is the Seneca director, Luke Murray, who was attempting to answer some questions he'd been asked by local residents about battery fires and battery safety. And these battery sites are going to be so very close to residential areas, so it is a huge concern. And I have to say that his answers weren't particularly reassuring so far. There's a very, very big unknown about these batteries. And thank you also to Edmund for his wonderful summary of fires and toxic gases before that as well. So we're moving on now. We're just coming up to our last live speaker. I do appreciate we're a little bit behind schedule, but just wanted to touch on why these giant solar plants are being allowed through the government with this untested battery technology on this scale, and why are they being pushed through by developers? Why are the governments allowing it, as they have just done with Cleve Hill, and why at such a pace? Because the developers here just don't care. They don't even live here. They get the proposal through to planning approval stage, and then they will sell it on to another company to construct. So in the Seneca webinars, Matt Hazel's repeatedly called these areas an appropriate host for solar, which is just so impersonal. We don't feel like we live in a host here, where this is our home, this is our countryside, this is our local landscape. So again, just going back to the pride that we feel about living here. And the biggest problem we have resulting in this situation at the moment is the lack of policy. And when Alok Sharma accepted the Cleve Hill scheme in Kent, he admitted that there is a lack, an absence of national policy statement for these large-scale, nationally significant infrastructure projects with solar and battery storage connected with it. And that's the problem. Where there's a gap in policy, opens up the door for the greedy developers to come in, grab as much land as they can until the gap is plugged, and basically cover our greenfield land with these battery systems and massive scale solar sites. And we need to plug this. So I'm going to welcome our final live guest of the evening, Brian Harvey, who is Chairman of West Suffolk Council. Thank you so much for your patience, Brian. And I would like to hand over to you for your thoughts on the Seneca scheme.
Hi, good evening all. Thank you very much indeed. I'm Brian Harvey, currently the chairman for West Suffolk Council, but much more importantly, I'm the district councillor representing 2 villages. There's 5 in total, but 2 villages, Freckenham and Wellington. And I've worked very closely with all the residents in the area. We've had 3 virtual feedback questions and answer sessions, which have been very well received. I must say that right from the start, we have to approach any scheme that's presented for planning in a positive manner. We have to be neutral, no prejudging, and that's exactly what I personally have done in this particular case. Listen to the arguments, work backwards and forwards with a very professional team based at West Suffolk, and we have now almost finalised the joint response, which is going to go through the approval system, but it's a joint paper that's been produced in conjunction with Suffolk County Council, West Suffolk District Council, East Cambridge District Council and Cambridge County Council. And it's a document that once it's through the system will be published, it will be known throughout. We've covered, in my opinion, the majority of queries and questions, but we've looked specifically at the Seneca proposals in their PIER submissions, their various schemes, drawings and proposals overall, covering the whole spectrum of concerns and clarification. I can tell you the report is 77 pages long. I'm sure that if we worked for another 2 or 3 days, it could be up to 100. There's so many concerns within the proposal that's been presented to us. There is so much lack of detail and clarification of the various points, which has really caused quite considerable concern among those that have been reading through and checking through. And I must say that our professional teams within the planning departments have really excelled themselves. Not only the planning department, but we've picked up environmental, the rural community, ecology, arboreal, all the other different sections inside. And the report itself is very comprehensive. We will be making this, once it's gone through the process and has been finally approved, which will be towards the end of this week, early next week, it will then be submitted as the joint Seneca response to the Seneca proposals in the system in accordance with the public consultation process. In the meantime, as you heard from Lance earlier, we've now received a copy of a letter, and I hope that's been provided to the action group as well, from Matt Hancock and Lucy Fraser, the Cambridgeshire MP, and they both have taken the same considered approach, the same as we've done, and now firmly come out in support of the objections to the current scheme in its current format. You've heard earlier on that we all support green energy. There are lots of different ways of doing green energy. We're looking at the solar farms, we're looking at wind, we're looking at heat pumps. There's loads of different things. Indeed, the recent construction and nearly finished now of the new Mildnall hub based in Mildnall itself and outside is a joint scheme that's supporting various government departments, schools, libraries, leisure facilities. But much more importantly today, they have a complete solar panel system on their roofs with battery storage installed as well. So we shall maximise the effect of the overall solar and battery storage. I think the big thing to think and remember about this particular scheme, it really doesn't produce the volume of profit just on solar. Has been spoken a couple of times, and I was particularly impressed with the battery and our scientists. I'm not a scientist, I'm a knowledgeable person, but at the end of the day, the concern is that the importation of electricity via the switching system coming in and storage during the night will be brought at a cut down price. We all know we have night back electricity sold back during the day, but that profit of that sale back will not come into the local community. The local community via the business rates is estimated at the moment approximately, and I'm very approximately, I haven't final for hasn't been worked out, but you could be looking at about £2 million a year income coming into county and to districts as it stands. That will be a fraction of the profit that this scheme will make overall of our scale, and will be funded via pension funds, private investors, not government funded. You've heard earlier on that the scheme itself will not be authorised by the local council. So East Cambs District Council, West Suffolk District Council are not part of the authorising authority. Because it's a national infrastructure project, we're statutory consultees in this matter. And as such, we have an obligation to respond to the plans themselves that have been submitted. And the details that have been submitted are what we've looked at exclusively as it stands. We'll be staying later on for the question and answer session. I'm very happy to answer any questions that come up if it's within my power. I'd like to, I think Andy Drummer, my colleague, is here. No, I'm seeing that he's not. Andy's our portfolio holder for planning and regulatory at West Suffolk District Council. Andy and I have worked very closely overall with the scheme, and I must say that the support united front, both of county councillors, Richard Rout and the county council team, Andy Drummond and the team at West Suffolk, in conjunction with East Cambs District Council and the county council. I'm very pleased to see Mark Goldschach here this evening, has worked very hard and to go through this thing as it stands. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. And yeah, I mean, we're in awe. I think you've done an amazing job going through the proposal, and the united approach hopefully will be that much stronger. So thank you so much for coming here tonight. Thank you for your support throughout this process and continued support moving forwards. Obviously we're in the consultation phase at the moment. That ends on the 18th of December, after which point you can then register. Well, if it then gets approved as an application by the Planning Inspectorate, then you can register as an interested party and raise your concerns. But in the meanwhile, do write to your MPs about any concerns, fill in your questionnaire back to Sonica before the 18th of December, and that's pretty much where we're at right now. So writing is the best thing to do in the immediate term. So that really brings us to the end of the formal presentations here tonight, and I do apologise that we've overrun, but we've had some really fantastic content, and I want to give a huge thanks to all of our contributors tonight, our live speakers, our non-live speakers, our friends over in Virginia, and everyone behind the scenes who've been working so hard to bring this event together today. And we've had some just fantastic subjects covered tonight. So we are going to move on to a question and answer session. Some of our guests have agreed to stay on as panelists. Thank you so much for that. We'll spend probably about 10-15 minutes doing questions and answers, and anything that doesn't get answered within that time, we will follow up and we will post the responses on Facebook. So can I welcome our guests into the studio, please? So we have Brian Harvey and Mark Goldschach from West Suffolk and Cambridge County Councils. We've got Lance Stanbury, a local candidate for Mildenhall, also part of West Suffolk Council. I'm delighted to welcome as well Lutz Stewart, who I can see who's joined us there. She is from the Graveny Rural Environment Action Team. So they were responsible for campaigning against the Cleve Hill project in Kent. So thank you so much for coming along tonight. We've got Lisa Linos and Paris from the Wildlife, Energy and Community Coalition. And we've also got our very own Isabel and Edmund, possibly Steve Wilson as well somewhere. Yes, I can see Steve from the Say No to Seneca Community Action Group. So thanks so much. I'm going to hand over to Paris because she's been following the questions as they've been coming through tonight. So shall we take our first one, please?
Of course, yes. So I want to say, though, that we've been overwhelmed by the positive responses from all the comment sections, both on Facebook and YouTube. And so I wanted to start out with, as an outsider, I think there's a lot of confusion around this project. We've been seeing in comments and questions saying, you guys have said that we're going to be destroying fertile land, disrupting wildlife and habitat with this Seneca project. And it seems that we're all in agreement that this project is not sustainable. However, I think there's a lot of, what would you say to those that would push back and say, we need this project? Or what would you like to say specifically to those that don't live in your community?
Wow, that's a good question. Would anyone like to raise their hand if they'd like to take it? I'm partly thinking Brian Harvey or Mark Goldsack. Yes, Mark, would you? I'll hand over to Mark Goldsack.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Paris. Not an easy question, but I think you've seen tonight quite a myriad of options and ideas as to alternatives to taking such good farmland out of food production. Many people have mentioned, why aren't solar panels going on day construction? I can tell you now, I'm sure Brian feels the same as me. Until government changes centralised planning regulations and makes this more of a mandatory action that we should be looking for, then we can hold developers to account to make sure that this is going on for tomorrow. As I did say, in Cambridgeshire, we're doing some retrofit work into our schools and into our colleges. But what we're also doing is we're looking at other source, ground source, air source. There's lots of other things out there. And can I just say that, as one of the flattest counties in the UK, we shouldn't lose sight of wind. Everybody's terrified by these huge, great monolithic things that go up. They don't have to be that. One of the things that we've got in Cambridgeshire, sorry, Brian, but in Cambridgeshire at this moment, we've got a 33,000 acre farm and rural estate, 200 tenants, right? It's a real crown jewels. So what we're doing is we're making sure that we know every square inch of those in terms of buildings. Then we're looking to work with those tenant farmers towards their own ELMS applications for the environment and the way that goes forward. And it's all about, I can't remember who the speaker was, but he was bang on when he said, and it's all about environmental management of that land. And that's the way forward. If we get all of that right and do all of that, then whoever asked the question, Paris, they could say that they will get the electricity, they will get the green future that they need without taking up, I don't know how many football pitches of land out of our community.
Lovely, thank you, Mark. And I know Brian, you say a few points on that.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's a good question. We've got to look in the rural community. The rural community needs to continue to expand and develop. But the key, in my opinion, is it needs to be appropriate development in the right locations, taking into account the ecology. I mean, I've had photographs coming in for great crested newts from residents that have found them in a bucket in their back garden. Where else in Suffolk would we get it? The other thing is that this scheme in particular, when we held one of our live feeds, we picked up residents from Ipswich that obviously got word that the scheme was going on. They came in and asked very direct questions. Ipswich, on the outskirts of Ipswich, there's two schemes which are solar farms with battery storage, which are separate schemes. I think one's run by EDF and another's run by one of the other electrical generating companies. But because of their size and scale, they go through the normal planning process. So local residents, local planning inspectors, and all the controls would be applied. This specific scheme, if you look at the map, some of the maps that were earlier on, we've effectively got 4 solar farms round up together. Now, if I was a cynical person, or sometimes I am, and I'll get criticised for it, I would say that's been done deliberately to get through the local planning rules and regulations to turn it into a major infrastructure scheme. When we had Matt Hancock online, I think 3 weeks ago, for our live feed, Matt again was asking the same question: why the scale and volume of capacity? We locally, in my ward, which represents Freckenham and Wellington at the same time, we interlink with our colleagues next door in Isleham, Snarlswell, Chippenham, and Red Lodge, which is in West Suffolk. The concerns that we're getting are exactly, you showed on one of the last slides there, the zone of impact if the batteries were to catch fire. That really is very concerning. We have 2 schools at Red Lodge, which will be directly in that outer ring circle for the Red Lodge area. When I went onto the ONS maps to measure up, the brand new school at Red Lodge at the side, there's approximately 1.4 kilometres from the centre of the storage farm down on Elms Road. We've got tremendous impact coming on the road system, the effect of HGV vehicles. We've got a highways departments which haven't even been consulted during the early stages of the scheme, with our highways engineers clearly stating in our report, you'll be able to read it when it gets published next week, stating that they've not had a chance to look or been consulted during this process. We've got a movements of over 800 vehicles, extra movements on our roads. Our roads locally, I'm sure Mark would agree, in the village roads around Cambridgeshire as well, are just not suitable for these heavy duty 40-ton HGV vehicles. With all due respect to all farmers listening, we have an anaerobic digester plant, same as what Mark has got, which is producing gas into the system very effectively. We recently had a change of ownership, and because they lost some land taken out of production, they had to bring over 100 extra lorry loads of stuff in from other sites. The new owners of the site weren't aware of the traffic management scheme. So these 100 HGV type tractor with huge trailers were coming through the villages. Eventually that was stopped and we spoke to them, we put our enforcement officers on it, and they're now fully aware of what they require to do. My gut reaction, I live in Wellington, by the way, sorry. And on my gut reaction is the impact on the local community. We have footpaths running down the high streets. Freckenham doesn't have as many, but Wellington has footpaths running down, because Freckenham doesn't have many footpaths, unfortunately. But Wellington running down the bit, we've got elderly residents frightened to walk along the paths with the lorries coming through and sucking them into the roads because of the speed. We all know about speeding through the villages. We're regularly monitoring the speeds coming in and approaching the villages. With the local Suffolk Constabulary, with our local inspector and speed safety pen, we have regular attendance of the speed safety cameras and the prosecutions at the last resort, but letters, fines and notices going out. The impact that this scheme will have overall on the main residents living actually in the areas, and the impact of visual impact, which we've heard earlier on this evening. The other thing that I was really impressed with at one of our later stages was the mental impact. We had a lady on that joined us in one of the live feeds, was explaining the mental impact. I know Isabel has covered that this evening, but at the end of the day, it's that auxiliary impact that we've got. The other thing really us at the moment is there's so many men on site, so not necessarily men, tradesmen on site. Is there going to be one of these Portakabin cities set up with mobile camper vans and caravans sited for 800 workers or 500 workers to be placed? No answer to that, not been covered, but that is covered in our proposal. Thank you.
Right, of course, and I thank you for that response, Brian. I think it's clear that not only will it affect your community. Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
No, it's fine. Carry on, Paris.
Oh, okay. Not only affect your community, but the surrounding areas. And I think an important quote that I just wanted to reiterate, like Lan said, is zero carbon doesn't make it environmentally friendly. And we just got a question come in for Lut. I'm terribly sorry if I mispronounced your name. But one person asked, did your local authorities and local MPs oppose Cleve Hill? And did your campaign follow similar lines to this one? And did you raise the risks associated with battery technology?
No, for
yes.
me, Paris.
There you are.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I have no idea about Cleve's Farm, unfortunately.
No, yeah.
It was for Lut. It was for Lut.
Yeah. So I'm Lut Stewart, and I've been involved in the campaign to try and prevent the ginormous solar farm and battery storage. And of course, like yourself, the battery storage is the element that came in last. And it's for the developers the most important part and the most profitable part. Yes, we had all the political parties supported us. The council, the local Faversham Council supported us. Swale Borough Council supported us. Kent County Council, not so much, in the sense that in that, for instance, highways just took the view that the country lanes were very suitable for hundreds of lorries to come past, on a daily basis. But we also had the Minister of I think the Minister of Social Care, and I've forgotten her name. How can I forget her? Helen, whatever, supported us, and she very much. And when I read Matt Hancock's statement in the paper today, I think he must have leaned that from her, because it sounds very, very similar. And she gave her support to us. She's conservative, gave her support to us, and did do a lot of networking with various ministers and ministerial bodies, with BIS, and at the end of the day, of course, I think she could do nothing but vote with her colleagues. Helen Whately, that's the name. So all the parties, particularly also the Green Party, was very supportive. All the local groups were very supportive. The only group that wasn't very supportive, and it's interesting to see the response you had, was the oh God, what is it called? The God. Earth, what's that party with Earth in it? Go on.
Friends of the Earth. Friends of the Earth.
They were the only party and the only people in the whole world who supported the solar farm, which really was a blow to us. But although we had very good support, were very, very lucky in that we had people who are very knowledgeable, experts in science, and they were able. And I think you mentioned Dr. Bruno Raisin. He was with us. He explained the impact of a possible explosion, and we had absolute specialists, people who were so knowledgeable, far more knowledgeable than some of the developers when they were there. But it just did not make an impact on the inspection, on the inspectors. I mean, anything that you came up with, like the landscape, the environment, culture, heritage, the impact on people. And don't forget, in our particular village, is very significant. A very significant proportion of that is elderly people, and it was absolutely of no importance whatsoever, and everything basically was poo-pooed. And I think the thing that you have got, which I think is probably is very important at this stage, particularly today, listening to the Brexit negotiations, the preservation of agricultural land, that's taken on a different meaning, hasn't it? You cannot lose it. And I think the argument has always been, if the development is for the greater good of people, if Cleve Hill is for the greater good of people, then it should come about. Well, I think in your case, of course, you can't say that it's for the greater good of people to plant all those solar panels on good agricultural land, because that's not to the greater good, and it will actually have quite a negative impact on people. But I thought your presentation this evening was very comprehensive. I must congratulate you on that, and I think the people who spoke, they spoke with knowledge and passion, and it made it real, really, and the impacts of it are visible. Unfortunately, you are up against people who are just motivated by greed, and we thought we had a good case for Cleve Hill not to go ahead, and certainly not to go ahead on the scale that has been agreed, but we lost every argument, and I think that is because the government had decided before and that it was going to be accepted.
Great.
Thank you so much, Luke. Thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer. And yeah, we are, we need to carry on and pursue as much as we can, and have as united a front as we can on this. So thank you so much for that. I'm just going to bring in Edmund, because he did have a point that he'd raised a hand for in the previous question, which was the pushback. And then I know Brian Harvey wanted to say a few words about the process and the development consent order as in the next step. So given the time, shall we go to Edmund and then to Brian? And then I think, is it okay with everyone if we take other questions offline and answer them on Facebook? Would that be okay with everybody? Okay, so Edmund, over to you.
So I just wanted to respond to the original question that Paris bowled out, which is, what do we say to the people who push back and say, well, actually, we need this, we need the energy, and we need it from clean sources and all that kind of stuff? Well, I think there are two answers that I would give to that. The first is very, very simple, and several people actually mentioned it. Lance, I think, made the best case about this, which is that nobody involved with this has any objection to putting solar panels on rooftops. You've already allocated the land for a building. Why not stick a solar panel on the roof? If you think you can make it work for you, I've got no objections to that. What we're objecting to here is ground-mounted solar panels, which are taking up land that is, in this case, primarily agricultural, or it's environmental conservation and so on. So that's the first easy answer. The second answer is that you have to measure this against the alternatives that are available in other forms of power generation. If you take Soneca's nameplate power capacity of 500 megawatts, and then you look at how many megawatt hours they expect to generate over a year, then it's a lot less impressive, because if you take the energy generated over a year and you divide by the number of hours in the year, you end up with an annual average over the year power generation of only something like 67 megawatts. Now, that is not very much, and it's the size of really a very minor conventional power station. I went down a list just quickly on Wikipedia, and I found a power station in Lancashire called Blackburn Mill, and that has a rated capacity of 60 megawatts. So it's pretty much comparable. But hey, what is the footprint of Blackburn Mill Power Station? It's just 150 meters by 120. So if you draw a square on the map, which is 200 meters square, you can stick a conventional power station of 60 megawatts within that, or even more than 60 megawatts. And it doesn't matter whether it's coal or whether it's gas or whether it's biomass or whether it's nuclear. You can get that same amount of power reliably, which the sun is not, from just a 200 meter square. It is tiny, it is minuscule, it is insignificant compared to the amount of land that you have to take up to get the same amount of energy with solar. And you've got to do the batteries as well, because it's all unreliable and it's coming when you don't need it, in the middle of the day or in the summer, and not in midwinter and not at night. So that you have to compare this thing against the alternatives. And when you look at the size and the land taken up by the alternatives, it is just, to me, frankly, insane that you would use that amount of land for such a little amount of energy produced.
Agree.
Excellent point. Totally agree. Okay, and Brian Harvey, I'm going to just bring you in because there were some points on the process and the development consent order.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that, Edmund. I'm really interested in the batteries and what's going on. I've been worked with them several times before. Just to explain to everybody that the closing date for the public consultation is the 18th of December. If you have a submission, comments, concerns or support, then you must submit those through to Sonica on the website and the letters that have been given. Once the 18th of December is closed, then the process that Sonica have to go through is to present to and submit to the planning inspectors an application for the development control order. Now, within that order itself, they have to have updated the details, detailed responses, specific details of the site. I think everybody would agree that the information that's actually provided during the consultation is very scant and can be interpreted in several different ways, which really concerns the team. But the development control order gives us another opportunity to query, to question, and to ask why. Now, we in our report have asked specifically why the sites were chosen, what's the rationale behind the sites, and what's going on with the sites themselves. People have asked and submitted numerous questions. I've seen several of them. I've seen the parish councils' draft responses and submissions, both from the Cambridge parish councils and from the Suffolk parish councils. All that information has to be assimilated, reproduced and presented in a format that we can go through our document. As I say, it's a huge document, and answer the questions. They've specified what's going on. They've specified how they're going to use the roads, how they're going to cross the junctions, how the boring's going to be, how they're doing the fire protection for the battery storage, where's the workshops going. There's so many questions that need to be responded to. Once that consultation goes on as well, we have the opportunity to submit representation to the planning inspectors so that we can speak or be represented at the actual meeting itself. There's a process for that, and I just can't remember what that's called, but you will get the opportunity to go through and do that. Again, it's very important that you look and scrutinise. Now, I must say, in perhaps a little bit dissatisfied, there's been a very poor response and very poor attendance on the webinars that Sonica has been doing throughout the system, 19 and 20 people attending. When you look at the volume of people involved and presented, perhaps there is a reason for that. And we've tried to look at that itself. And my concern with the Sonica webinars has been and related to the interaction between those that are asking questions. The impression that's come up is that they are selected answers to selected questions. And that's totally wrong. When we've done our own village responses and Matt's response the other day, you had the opportunity to be on camera. That gives everybody an opportunity to see who's speaking and what they're speaking about, not hiding behind a blank screen. You ask a question and you get a response. If we don't know the answer, we say so at that time. We've had a lot of flour coming through about, oh yes, that'll be okay at the end of the day. one of the webinars that I attended asked a specific question: will you be compliant with highways safety rules and regulations, statutory regulations? Yes, we'll be fully compliant. I'm very sorry, but if you haven't consulted with highways, how do you know what their regulations are? There's a great deal of work still to be done, but I would stress again and again and again, if you have a comment, have a concern, please make sure you submit it. By all means, send us a copy of your response, but it's too late now for that. Our paper is now drawn and going through the approval process. So you must send your letters through. One or two people have said about contacting their MPs. Yes, that's the right way to go. The MPs are already doing, but the MPs now, both Matt and Lucy, have come out and stated their support for the scheme, and they're now starting to lobby through the scheme. I can respond to another one, a question: is this now fait accompli? I can't possibly answer that question. We can only do and submit our responses and queries to the system. An independent planning inspector will review all and make the recommendation to the Secretary of State. The MPs come in at that stage to look at and to lobby against the actual schemes it's on. And that's all I would like to say. Thank you very much indeed.
Wonderful. That's great, Brian. So we've had a couple of questions come through just about the county council, about local residents feeling ignored. And I think you've covered some of those in terms of how we can get our voices heard with the questionnaire. And obviously at the next step, if it gets through to the next step, we can register as interested parties. So I'm going to, I'll have another look at those in a bit. And if there's any other detail in that, we will answer that offline. Lut, I know that you've just had your hand up just to make a final comment there. And then I think we're going to have to hand over to Isabel to wrap up, and we'll collate any other questions together and respond to those over Facebook. Thank you. Lut, over to you.
The response to the webinars, I think one of the issues is, like ourselves, having people who perhaps a bit older, they do not have access to IT very often, and they're not haven't got internet, or they're not really used to using that, and therefore we used pen and paper really, and facilitated a process like that. And I think people have said to me, this was a fait accompli right from the start. Would you, what have you been doing for 2.5 years? Making yourself tired, doing this, doing that, campaigning. And I've just said I would do it again because it is worth it. It does mean that you understand what's going on. It does mean that ultimately you can still affect the process. And whilst, we have to live with the fact that it has been approved, the management plans that now have to come forward do have an input from GREAT, which is the Graveney Rural Environment Action Team, our campaign group, and we are working with Swale Borough Council on responding to those action plans. So at the end of the day, we still have a voice.
Thank you, Lut. So I'm going to hand over to Isabel to wrap up. And as I said before, we'll collate any other questions and we will reply to those on Facebook.
Close. I know we've had more than 120 followers on our streams tonight, so that's been fantastic. And we will try and answer the questions that we haven't covered. I think there's been some real enthusiasm, and I think it's been a great event. We've covered many, many topics vital to our understanding of the environment and this energy scheme. I think two things for me are front and centre. We demand preservation, not mitigation, and we need safety, not sacrifice. A few people have mentioned what you can do. Sign the petition, I think might be coming along the screen at some point at the bottom. Sign the petition, answer the Sonica consultation, follow us on social media for news and share your views and information you find, and join our campaign. Sign up on our website, which is saynotosonica.com. I'd like to give a huge thank you to all our guests and our presenters, Catherine for being a fabulous chair. Well done. And to our great partners and friends from the Wildlife Energy Community Coalition, and from Virginia for sharing their films with us, from Faversham in Kent. I think Longfield are also following us from Chelmsford, and for everybody for showing an interest in our Stand Together event. Maybe if we've got enough subjects to take forward, we need more Stand Together UK events, and let's see whether we can do more like this. The Sonica scheme and any others like it have no place here or elsewhere. So remember, preservation, not mitigation, safety, not sacrifice. Have a good evening, everybody, and do take care. Thank you.